Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. Today we are going to be talking to Rasheera Dopson. She's a disability rights advocate, a disability justice advocate. She's also a speaker, she's a host, and she is going to be talking to us about what exactly disability justice is and why is it important, especially to advocate for women and girls with disabilities. So we're going to be talking to her about that, about the idea of intersectionality, what it means when someone has hi, Rasheera, has more than one marginality, but also finding the beauty in marginality and in uniqueness, even though that can often be a challenge, as she often experiences with having a rare disease. So I'm so excited to be talking. We're going to get to talk to her today. As you know, we are here every Thursday, usually at this time, 1 o'clock Eastern, but always watch for those announcements in case sometimes we have to do a slightly different schedule. Hi. So
Hi.
great to talk with
You,
you.
you too.
Thanks for being here today. Well, why don't you go ahead? I gave a little bit of an introduction, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rasheera Dopson, and I wear quite a few hats. I'm a published author, I'm a public speaker. I'm currently a PhD student getting my PhD degree. So I also identify professionally as a researcher, a qualitative researcher. I am an advocate, and so yeah, in this capacity, I'm really excited to speak with you all this afternoon. We are in different time zones, so sometimes it's hard to keep track, but
Yeah.
I'm really excited to speak with you all today.
Yes, thank you for being here. And gosh, you are so busy. And when I was reading like the list of the things that you're doing, I was like, wow, you do so much. And I know that you're in the advocacy space, you're researching, you're an author. But maybe we can talk. I think we talk a little bit about the disability justice piece of it. First, maybe we can start off defining terms. Can you explain to us what exactly is disability justice? And especially, what does it mean for women and girls with disabilities? Why is that piece of it so important?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just for a little background, a little historical lesson. When we traditionally think about the disability rights movement, it was a movement, kind of led by people. We know who Judy Heumann is. We call her the mother of the disability rights movement. That took place kind of after the civil rights movement, which um, talked about how people with disabilities didn't have basic human rights here in the United States. And this movement kind of took place during the early 70s, in which we now have the laws, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990, by President George H.W. Bush. And this movement really galvanized a greater awareness about some of the disparities and discrimination that people with disabilities were experiencing here in the U.S. Um, However, that movement often did not look at disability in the intersections and the margins of how that can vary across culture, across language, across demographics, etc. And
Mhm.
so the disability justice movement is rather new, probably within the past 10 to 20 years, is a new emerging framework that looks at disability from a more diverse and intersectional lens. So we're not just looking at disability in the terms of we have tangible legal rights, right, to enter into a building, to get education access, for accommodations and accessibility. We are now looking at disability almost in a very specific lens to how disability is also impacting individuals who are either also a part of other marginalized or minoritized communities. And this is particularly important, especially for women with disabilities, in which a lot of people tend to think that disability is a monolith. What is a monolith? A monolith is basically a term that says that something is either the same. And so a lot of people, when they think about disability, they're either thinking that when we see different models of disability in culture, we're seeing that disability is either white, it is male, or is cisgendered, right?
Right.
And so disability justice frameworks, it really wants to uplift and amplify the identities and descriptive experiences of individuals that you typically do not see or that we relate to when we're talking about disability. So that's talking about people in the BIPOC spectrum, Black,
Mhm.
Indigenous people of color, Asians with disabilities, Hispanic, Latinx communities with disabilities, queer communities, the LGBTQIA community, and different types of variations wherever there are intersecting lived experiences, such as your gender, such as your race, such as your socioeconomic status. That's what disability justice wants to expand and bring representation for those individuals as well.
I'm so glad you explained it because I mean, one, this idea that of a monolith that that there's so much variation, different experiences, and like you said, it also depends on what other kinds of identities you have. But also, I think a lot of times people hear the term disability justice and they assume it's just a new term for the same thing when it's actually something quite different. You
Yeah.
know, really bringing this new lens to how we're talking about it. And it's funny because I was just talking to my son because I usually tell them like who I'm interviewing today and what kind of get to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
And we're also talking about the different kinds of disabilities because usually if you have I work in the space of children's books
Mhm.
and usually they have like it almost seems like they're checking off boxes to make sure they have the
Oh,
diversity. That like there has to be one black kid
right.
and maybe an Asian kid and a kid in a wheelchair,
Yeah.
right? To have the diversity. But and that's what you tend to think of as opposed to I know you've talked about there's so many different kinds of disabilities and sometimes they're not as obvious or we're not as familiar with them and knowing how to accommodate. So this is
Yeah.
such a great conversation. And I know you've done so much in this space. You're the founder of two organizations. You have the Dobson Foundation and you also have Beauty with a Twist. And both of them are dedicated to creating spaces of inclusion for women and girls with disability. So, what was the gap that you saw that you wanted to fill by creating these foundations?
Yeah, these foundations, still a work in progress, are still very new and emerging, but they really came from a personal place of seeing that as being a Black woman myself with a disability, I didn't see a lot of spaces in community in which I found representation. And so I felt these organizations were kind of aimed to filling up those spaces where are women with disabilities connecting. I remember growing up and reading, 17 magazine and all
Right.
the, Glamour Girl, all the teen girl magazines. And I just remember very vividly, and even on television, not really seeing really no images of women who were disabled
Right.
and how this really subconscious on a subconscious level it impacted the view of myself and my self-esteem because even if sometimes when there is an absence of something it indirectly perpetuates a message saying that something is either not possible or it's not achievable. And so that created a really weird dynamics in my psychology in thinking, can women with disabilities, can we have careers? Can we become mothers? Can we become wives and different things like that? And so I'm typically one of those people, whenever I do not see something being addressed in the community, I create it. And so I decided to create a space, an organization that was really tailored and specific to women having spaces to connect, either through lived experience, medical journeys, etc., because there's so much nuance involved in the experience, the lived experiences with women with disabilities. And so, like I said, the organizations are still kind of work in progress, and now because I'm in school, that's kind of taking the back burner a little bit.
Sure.
But I do believe, hopefully, once I graduate, I'll be able to take it more on hands on. But really building spaces and utilizing things such as social media, digital communities, and those types of spaces that seem to be more accessible to just create more of a community for women specifically with disabilities to just become connected to one another.
That's so amazing. I mean, I love that you're the kind of person that if you don't see it, then you go out and do it. You make it
Yeah.
happen. That's wonderful. And like we said, you do wear a lot of different hats. You're an advocate, a writer, a speaker, a research fellow. You're getting your PhD. And you said that really your real passion is to be a voice from your for your community and to enlighten and to educate, uplift other people with disabilities. what do you want for people? I imagine, I don't know, that you're always having to kind of have that dual perspective of speaking to, empowering people who have disabilities, but also educating people who don't.
Yeah.
For those who don't have disabilities, what do you want them to understand about the challenges faced, especially by women and girls with disabilities?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the first half of that question of what would I want people to truly understand and internalize, is that disability is very common, and I think for such a long time we have really phenomenalized disability, like, oh, it's only for a certain type of
Mm-hmm.
people or special people. Um, and I engage with so many people on a day-to-day basis. You'll be really surprised of how many people are so close in proximity to having a disability. And they either do not disclose because there's still a lot of shame and stigma associated with the label, or because there's either under or lack of education when it relates to disability. So a lot of misunderstanding around that. And so, just to demystify that disability is for special people, but it's a part of the human condition. I'm quoting Haben Girma, who is a well-known disability activist as well. She's also a Black woman, but it's a normal part of the diversity spectrum, and it's a normal part of the human condition. So I think on a conscious level, if we can really wrap our minds around and normalize as disability being something that everyone can experience at any time in their lives, that it can become less scary and less stigmatizing. And then on the second end of that question about how it's important for for people to know that there are also women and girls with disabilities, we are so lucky in this period and era in our culture and society in which it's all about the girl, right? Female is future. We're so empowered. But I think if we only focus on a specific type of woman, then we're missing out on so many other types of women, or how to be a woman, how to show up in a woman, how womanhood and femininity expresses itself. And we can exclude people intentionally and unintentionally. And so I really honed in on specifically women and girls with disabilities, because I realize, as much as I love being a woman and as much as I love being a girl, and how I have so many girlfriends and sisters, and a part of a lot of great female centered communities, that my experience compared to my non disabled sisters are night and day. It's night and day. It's completely different. And how there needs to be more conversation about, well, how do you approach things such as like dating and sexuality if you have a disability?
Mm-hmm.
How do you combat images of body positivity and self worth and self esteem if traditionally your body, your disabled body, has been seen as something that is not beautiful?
Right.
How are you empowering girls with disabilities to see themselves in the spirit of beauty if society says disability is ugly? And so all of these different types of these polarized opposites that are really important, that if we are in the era of where we want gender equity and female inclusion and all of these great things to empower women, that also includes empowering women with disabilities.
I love that. And I want to recommend anybody who's watching, if you haven't visited Rishia's Instagram feed, you should really go. I had such a great time just going through and looking at all of your reels, because you give a lot of information and a lot of things for people to think about. And I know you had one that you had done with some friends, or other people recently, and it was talking about representation in media. And you don't really think about it so much, especially people with facial
Yeah.
differences, and how a lot of times that's linked to a villain, or
Hmm.
something, or it's portrayed as being really ugly.
Yeah.
Things that we don't think about, we just kind of absorb that are in the culture, and we don't really think about it very critically.
Yeah.
But I love that you have this focus about talking about beauty and dating and sexuality, because that is so important to have how somebody lives their full life. And you had a quote on Instagram recently where you said, beauty is not about looking cute, it's about taking ownership of who we are as women. And you were saying it's not being vain, it's not being superficial, that it's something really very important to who we are. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm such an advocate for beauty because I struggled so much with that term of beauty, with that term of pretty, because I was disabled and they seemed like they were on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like there was no space for them to coexist. And so I had to learn, this is where I got beauty with a twist from. I had
Mhm.
to learn how to reframe of what I idealize as beautiful because I grew up seeing images that portrayed and depicted beauty as looking a certain way. And if I was ever going to come into my own as a young woman and confidence and the realization and owning one's beauty is a part of that process,
Mhm.
then I needed to start looking at how beauty looked like for me and how it should be intended. And unfortunately, our culture has often shaped tropes and stereotypes that beauty is thin, that it is white, it has silky hair, it is American, all these different things that are not necessarily universal truths. And so I think that was really important for me to refine and to take ownership so I wouldn't be robbed of the experience and the process of also being considered beautiful too. So that's kind of like how I like to summarize it.
I love it. And something that struck me is I feel like what you're advocating for and what you're talking about is, of course, is targeted specifically to women and girls with disabilities, but really, I think it benefits everybody. You're talking about all these intersectionalities. That's
Yeah.
something that all of us, if we are questioning what this ideal of beauty is, it expands that for all of us and kind of gives us a deeper, richer meaning of what beautiful can be.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing that you're kind of doing this work for everybody. And specifically going back to talking about some of the challenges that you've faced. I know you've been very open about it, about the challenges of having disabilities, of having a rare disease, which can be very isolating. But you also said that in many ways it's a gift because it taught you to speak up for yourself, to be tenacious, and this was, I just love the way you phrased it. You said it taught you the beauty in marginality.
Mhm.
So what do you hope when you're sharing your story, what do you hope that other people take away with it? Either other people that are experiencing similar struggles or maybe people who aren't. What do you hope that they learn from your story?
Yeah, I think about the quote by Malala Yousafzai, who's also a well-known advocate for girls' education. And one of the things that she said stuck out to me. She said, "I'm not a lone voice, but I'm the voice of many." And so oftentimes I'm able to share my story and experience with others. I want people to be able to see themselves in my story. Because I remember being in the room or hearing speakers or like reading magazines or reading stories, and it was so hard for me to connect. And that lack of connection really attributed to a lot of isolation that I experienced. But every individual on this earth desires and has the right to experience connection and community and to be loved for who they are. And so I really hope that when people hear my story, that they hear more that there is a place where you belong to, that you should be accepted in who you are and your skin and your authenticity and who you are too. And you don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to be a certain way. You don't have to dress a certain way. You don't have to have a different type of pedigree. All you have to be is authentically yourself. And so I consider a great privilege and a blessing that I believe God has allowed me to go through so many things, to be able to connect with so many people. Like I tell people all the time, I have so many tools like in my archive, in my arsenal belt, because it's like I'm able to pull from so many experiences, and it allows me to touch people in a more deeper, meaningful way. And even if you don't have the specific condition that I do or disability, you might be a woman, or you might be a person who's black, or you might be educated, or you might come from a lower socioeconomic, background, or different types of things. You might be a Christian or whatever it may be that you have. I consider a great privilege to be able to connect with people, to help them possibly in their process, find community, find connection, find identity, and also help support them and empower them to find their purpose too. So, yeah.
That's so powerful. And thank you so much for that and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today. Hey,
Great.
maybe we could finish up by sharing. where people can find you online. Obviously, we're going to share the link to your website when we put this up on YouTube, but maybe you can tell people how they can get in touch with you or how they can access, kind of the resources that you have.
Yeah, feel free to follow me on Instagram, at Rasheera Dopson. I'm on TikTok too, at Rasheera Dop. My name is the same across all any type of social media platforms.
That makes it
I'm on Threads too. Yeah, I'm on Threads too. I've headed over to Threads and been finding some really engaging places there too. So if you're new to the Thread community, I think it's been really positive. Or you can just reach out to me via email at rashiradopson@gmail.com. I'm a really open person, so I get DMs quite often from people who just have questions or they want to comment, and I'm pretty responsive. Just don't be weird about it. But yeah, I love talking and connecting with people. I often think of myself that I've learned all the experience. They've been given to me as a gift, and so freely I get and freely I give. And so yeah, I really enjoyed doing this live, and it wasn't any time away from my schedule. I was eating some
Okay.
snacks before I came on, so I was happy to be on.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad it worked out. And thank you for being with us today. And for anybody who's watching, if you joined us late, this will be up in a few minutes on Instagram. Later, we'll have it on YouTube for talking with us today. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.